Hey, welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for hanging out. This has been an unreal. We've been live for what? 2.5 hours, a little over 2.5 hours. We've already raised $1,500 just through our Tiltify campaign for the Trevor Project. You all have been absolutely incredible. Chat has been exciting. The panels have been great. Thank you all. Thank you so much. My name's Eugenio. You might know me as DM Jazzy Hands. And I'm very excited to kick off our third panel of the day, Beyond Theros, bringing mythology from around the world to your table. And I have three phenomenally brilliant humans here with me today to talk about how we can bring mythology to our D&D games in general in a careful and respectful way, and then also to give us some ideas about specific myths and legends that we might want to use from cultures that they are familiar with. Before we get into any of that, though, let's go around and introduce our fantastic guests. Daniel, can we start with you?
Hey, yeah, I'm Daniel. I'm the co-host and producer of the Asians Represent podcast. I'm a game designer, freelance writer, and sensitivity reader.
Fantastic. We are thrilled to have you with us. Let's hop down to Mario. Hi, how you doing today?
Hi, how's it going? My name is
good.
Mario. My name is Mario Ortegon. I am a streamer from Mexico. You can find me on the internet as Awarius. I DM and produce Trece Alvas, which is a game hosted on D&D's Twitch channel where we play basically in a homebrew world shaped by the myths of our culture. In this case, pre-Hispanic Latin American myths. So yeah, that's me.
I love it. How's Luthi doing? I played with you all a long time ago, and I haven't thought about him in a while.
Yeah, we need
surviving
to
out there
chat.
somewhere.
Yeah, we need to
yeah.
chat.
Oh dear. Oh no, I shouldn't have asked.
We need to chat.
He's dead.
No, he's around.
I love
he's
it.
Around.
I
yeah.
love it. And last but most certainly not least, Ahmed, thank you so much for joining us. I know it's a little bit later where you are joining us from today.
Yeah, it's 10 p.m. right now.
Well, we appreciate you staying up for us. How about you tell everybody who you are?
Hi, I'm Ahmed. I try to translate content for the Western culture to understand our culture, and the D&D and RPG games to Arabs who don't speak English to have easier access to the games.
Fantastic. You do such good work, and I've been following you for a while, and I love it all of you, actually.
Thank you.
Awesome. So, all right, it looks like right now, just to keep you all informed, we are doing a giveaway, a D&D Beyond giveaway. So if you haven't yet, put exclamation mark Theros with a capital T in the chat to enter. Our mods are having quite a time doing all these giveaways, but make sure you enter that. Okay, let's get started with our conversation. So I sent you all sort of a list of questions to kick off because I do think it's worth stating up front before we get into some specifics of the myths and legends of our various cultures that obviously we want to be able to tell stories that are culturally diverse, that pull from all sorts of different cultures and countries from around the world. But, you know, as we are constantly talking about nowadays in the game industry, it's also really important, right, that when we're using story points and myths and legends and other cultures that are not our own, it's so important to do that carefully and respectfully, right? So that's the first thing that I want to talk about. And I sent you all a list of questions, but let's just sort of, does anyone have starting thoughts? Because I know the four of us for sure have all spent some time thinking about this even before this panel. So does anyone want to start us off with your thoughts about, you know, how we can approach this, how we can approach using but not appropriating other cultures?
Yeah, I think it's a big topic. On our channel, we talk about it all the time. We literally built a brand around it. But I think the thing that I want to let the audience know is that, at least from my perspective, and I wonder if the rest of you agree, we're not here to tell you what falls under the umbrella of cultural appropriation. We're not here to tell you that you can't use our cultures in your games. We're here to tell you that, you know, if you use another culture in, you know, a fictional representation, it's a risky practice and it's capable of doing very real harm, even though it's fiction. So that's, I kind of wanted to like put that out there, be like, hey, I'm not here to tell you, you can't use my Chinese culture. You could use whatever you want as long as it doesn't do harm. And then there are some nuances that I'm sure we're going to get into.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually a good framing for the beginning of this. So now that we have established with that it's not about us forbidding use of our cultures, but about helping you to use them responsibly and respectfully, and to avoid doing said harm. Ahmed and Mario, do you have thoughts about how we can start to talk about that? How we can start to do that?
I think it always helps that. So sometimes people approach me and say that, "Hey, I found this really cool thing that pulls some elements from like pre-Hispanic culture. Is this okay? Like, is this used in a fun way and in a respectful manner?" And I usually tell people that it all always boils down to like um, the way that you want to portray things, and you always have to maybe approach, if you're like going to add some elements from another culture to your games, you always want to make them as fleshed out and as how do I say this? I'm having trouble with the English. So basically, like not make them seem like a caricature or like a stereotype. Like don't
Mm-hmm.
Google Mesoamerican culture and then make a continent where everyone is the same and just basically just lump all of these incredibly nuanced and like different groups of people into the same sort of like blob. Like if you're gonna do something like that, make sure to approach it in the sense that you are actually um, uh, taking so many things from so many different places and reflect that in your game. Like, yes, okay, if you want to make a Mesoamerican continent, that sounds cool, but maybe like divide it in territories and like maybe just give each territory its own, how do I say that? Its own characteristic specific to that culture. So yeah, I guess to boil it down to a single word is like nuance and
Yeah.
just go beyond
Mm-hmm.
making it as simplistic as you can.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really important. I did a talk at, I guess, Gen Con a million years ago, because time is a flat circle and it's been 6 years since last week. I don't know when it was, but whatever. I gave a talk about using voices and dialects and accents in your gaming. And I said a very similar thing, which is, if it feels like a stereotype, then it's probably not the right approach, right? We are all so much more than the stereotypes that people from outside of our cultures think we are. And so while that might be a place for someone unfamiliar with the culture to sort of start their research, it's almost never, not never, but almost never the full picture to go with the obvious, easy stereotype, right? Ahmed, what do you think?
What I think like for me as an Arab, most of my issues about the never part is just don't confuse us with other cultures.
That is a great point.
I get it, like, because most of what you know about us from in myth is coming from 1001 Nights.
Sure.
And that's a mishmash of so many things, and not to mention the Islamic expansion, that it covers so much territory that people assume that Persian, Turkish, and all these cultures are Arab. So just dig more than just the surface. Try to make a good experience out of it, and definitely stay away from religion.
Yeah.
Good luck with all of that.
Yes.
It's literally part of our daily life. So it's gonna be
right.
Well, that's the thing
so
that a
easy.
lot of, I feel like, RPGs get wrong, is that they separate religion from daily life. They make them very distinct, whereas in many cultures they are one and the same. I mean, we were reading Legend of the Five Rings yesterday on stream, and they also like, they do this one thing that I think all of us have just said, and they oversimplify cultures. They oversimplify ideas that are present in an original culture, and they turn something that's nuanced and beautiful into something that's homogenous, cliched. They basically trivialize the source, right? And we see that with like Kara-Tur and D&D, Al-Qadim, Mazteca. Like, they're all reductions of a complex culture for an audience that is generally not of that culture.
Right. Yeah, and I think on the other side of that spectrum, I don't think any of us expect you to be a PhD scholar in a culture in order to be comfortable using it in your game. But it does bear repeating that, you know, we are not monoliths. Our cultures are not monoliths, and quite frankly, we are not the reductions, like Daniel said, of cultures that we see in old game products. So, you know, if you want to do this right, a little work is required. You don't have to get a degree in it, but a little work is required. Before we go on from this topic, which we could obviously talk about for the whole hour, I do want to ask if there's anything, and I know we've been staying away from absolutes, right? Never do this, always do that. Those are difficult, right? But are there things that any of you feel like, let's start with the more positive one. Are there things that you think, quick little pithy tips that you would give to somebody who wants to use someone else's culture's stories in their game that they should always do? Either the types of stories they should use, the type of research they should do, the type of communication they should have with their players, and if it's a public game, their audience. What are some always tips that you all might have for that?
That's an interesting one.
Yeah.
It's, and like I said, we are all realizing
it's
here
like it's like when you say like, what is an always? It's almost like asking to say, well, what is the one thing that is almost representative of your culture? And I know that there are people, and this is written in the old Oriental Adventures book, is like, oh, all Asians eat rice. So if I were to say an always, it would be like to not always not have that. But for me, a true always, as and you said like PhD scholar, I'm like, I was actually a PhD scholar in my culture.
I know you were. As it was coming out of my mouth, I was like, oh well,
but that's okay. But for me, it was like as a Chinese person, an always for me would be food.
Sure. Okay.
Like
I love that.
I love having food in my worlds. I love having food in my games because food is very much a lens into that culture. Right? When you're talking about differences in cuisine, you're talking about differences in access to different resources, differences in geography. And if you create varied cuisine within your food, A, it's very entertaining. B, it allows you to have a real conversation with your players. And C, that real conversation can turn into a real world experience where they go and learn about another culture.
I love that. Any other always? Yeah.
On this, I just want to add something on this, because like in the Arab culture, especially the nomadic one, they don't have chicken. This is like something very recent to us. We have goats and sheep, but chicken is such a weird thing for early Islam, pre-Islamic era. It's something like a city and urban thing, not something for someone who's traveling the deserts all the time to carry.
I love that. And that's the kind of little detail, right, that can really make the difference in a story without clinging to some stereotype, right? An easy stereotype. I love it. Mario, anything to add?
I would say, just to repeat what I said before, it's basically don't, like, if you're gonna represent something, make sure to go beyond just the surface Google search of what you're doing, right? So like if you're going to represent a certain aspect of Mexican culture, then maybe like I don't know, read a book, or just try to speak to actually someone who is Mexican, who has reach out. Just because I see so many times these places where, and this might be just stepping towards the what not to do. But I mean, if you're okay, if
absolutely,
to mention that, so well, the thing that I see many people doing that it just like grinds my gears is representing and making a game out of La Conquista, or the conquest, which is always sort of like, it's a sore spot, because I know there are people in the real world right now that are still like suffering because of that. You know, there's people out there in all of not just America, like all over the world, who are like still recovering from the the backlash and everything they suffered or they lost due to colonialism. And just to make a game out of that, where you play to, hey, you are a conquistador going out, and I'm not just like speaking out of like a hypothetical place. I've seen games like where they do that. There are a few games that I'm not gonna name But yeah. Well, I mean, Mastica is one of those. I mean, that one is pretty public that I can just like mention. Like Mastica is actually like a pretty much recreation, like word for word of the history of La Conquista. So yeah, like I think that one is a topic that should probably stay away from.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a good transition. And again, we could speak on this forever, but brief things that we should avoid doing. And that's a great one to start off on, Mario, which is, we could also have a whole panel about colonial mentality in TTRPGs. But I think specifically for what we're talking about here, which is using the stories, the history and the stories of various cultures, I think that's exactly it. I think you want to be very careful about how you're framing the myths and the stories that you're using, and not be, not always make the other culture the one that you're coming into to fix or save or XYZ, whatever.
100%.
Why can't your players be the ones that are from here that are helping themselves, right? What are some other things, Daniel and Ahmed, that bear repeating? I'm sure we've all said them a million times to everyone who will listen, but some things that bear repeating that we should really specifically try to avoid when we're looking at using stories and legends from other cultures.
Well, most importantly is just avoid the copy paste. Like, don't take it as it is. Just make it your own. Take whatever you think that is interesting and change it and adapt it to your own unique world and make something new out of it. Don't copy paste it.
I love that. I think that's a great point. We also, unless you are playing, a game that is set in a version of Earth, right? Yep. The cultures that you use to inspire you aren't the cultures in the game, right? We may use a Mexican-inspired deity or myth to tell part of our story. It doesn't mean the story is set in Mexico, right? In ancient, in pre-conquistador Mexico, right? So that's an excellent point to remember that you are still creating your own worlds and stories. Daniel, anything else?
No, I completely agree with that. I think where a lot of games go wrong is that they try to take something historical or mythological, and then they try to take some of that reality, put it in their game, but then also make up their own thing. So you end up getting this like half and half. And you see that, like, I mean, what's on my mind right now, you see that with like Legend of the Five Rings. And it's very clearly a game about Japan. And it's very clearly a game about one particular era in Japan's history, the Sengoku Jidai, right, or the Warring States period. But then they take liberties with the history, which is interesting. But if you compare that to something like Oriental Adventures, and they're very much like, okay, well, all these warriors, they're samurai. Like, wait. Karatur is supposed to be a region that represents Asia, like East Asia proper. So like people can take liberties, but then they also are extremely rigid and dogmatic when it comes to including history in their games. So I would say you're either going to do something like historical, or you're going to do complete work fiction, like Ahmed said.
Yeah, sure.
From a Chinese perspective, the one thing to like never really do is like, try not to make a fantasy version of the Cultural Revolution, because I've seen people try to do that. It doesn't work. A lot of people like to create fantasy Chinas, but in their head, what looks like a badass Asian character. Can I swear on this?
Yeah, PG-13. So that was
PG-13. Well, it looks like a heckin' cool Asian character is a samurai in their head. And then they go and they put Japanese tropes and Japanese themes, or maybe Japanese leaders, into a Chinese setting because they want to have the Great Wall. Well, then what have you just done? You've just brought up all of that trauma of Japan forcefully invading China during World War II. So that's the one thing that I'm always like, that's a no-go for me. And the second one is like, not every Asian person eats rice.
Yes,
I hate that.
Those are two excellent.
I hate both of those.
Ones.
They're on different ends of the spectrum of things I hate.
Yeah.
If there is like something I would like to add, it just occurred to me right now. It's because I have seen a few games that do this, and it's this is more personal instead of like a general don't do this kind of thing. Sure. I mean, it might be more broad, but basically, I've seen games that take the Mexican drug war and make that as a let's play Narcos, like to me, that is, I mean, I've been in at a few conventions where I've seen that game played, and I've been invited to play in those games. I'm not a how do I say it? I don't like confrontation that much, so I just like politely disagree. But I politely decline. I mean, but I internally I'm screaming when someone says that, because I live that every day. I mean, if I want, I can open my window and hear like bullets, and just it's a very personal thing that has happened not only to me but a lot of people that live in Mexico, and just like have a game that sort of um I don't know, like seeing like people who don't have because I've played in games with my friends here in Mexico where it's like more like a modern take, either Vampire or Nahual, the game that my friend is making, where we use that. You know, we use that and we add the as a an antagonist, the drug war and stuff like that. But there's something about seeing, because we've all lived it and we all know what it's like. There's something about seeing people who are completely outside of this in a privileged position that haven't had to deal with any of this stuff playing it for fun. You know what I mean? That is something just completely personal. I don't know if it goes beyond me. But,
it does. I will tell you, as a Mexican American, I was born and raised in the States, but both of my parents are from Mexico. And when I moved to New York to become an actor and started taking interviews with agents, I had one agent in particular tell me that they wouldn't be signing me because I don't look like a narco, and he wasn't sure what he would send me in for.
Oh, good Lord.
Exact words, right? So I tell that story to reassure you, Mario, that it's not just you, but also to say, you know, this is another good way to sort of think about, you know, what are these stereotypes that we want to be careful of? And unfortunately, and this is starting to change, I think, for all of our various cultures and representational areas, but the stereotypes that you very easily can pull out of popular media, probably not great. You know, that the narco trope is something that is very common in TV shows and movies for Latin Americans. The rice trope is something very common in any sort of you know, quote unquote Asian shows or movies. So that's, you know, if you can think of a show that did it, maybe be careful, right? That said, there are shows out there that do it well. And again, none of these things that we're saying are didactic statements. None of them are absolutes, but things to consider. All right, well, we're we're about halfway through. So I want to get to the other thing that I asked you all to come ready to talk about this afternoon, which is, what can you share with us, please, some stories, some legends, some myths, some concepts from cultures that you identify with and are familiar with, that you think are really great to use in D&D and in tabletop storytelling. I don't know. Who wants to start?
I can start.
Okay, go for it, Ahmed.
Sure. It's honestly, growing up, these things were just part of the folklore, like the stories I get told. I never really paid attention to it until like recently, when I'm actually asked about it. I live here, and this is part of my life, so it's not something I think too much about it. So one of the interesting thing that I do want like people to pay attention is the concept of jinn in our culture is very, very different than what you would see in a setting like Forgotten Realms. In our culture, jinn is made of fire, and they are one of the three races, which are humans, jinn, and then angels. So our image from a religious perspective comes toward the devil and the demons, the whole that kind of image of it. But if you go to pre-Islamic and away from Semitic religions, you go into an unknown superpower that lives away from any cultures that, and they marry humans, and they provide us with super abilities like magic. So whenever a poet is very good at poetry, they always claim that this guy has a jinn whispering poetry in his ears.
Huh. That's
cool.
so fascinating. Particularly, you know, particularly because and I'll use the term that we in Western culture most often think of, which is the genie trope, right? That is so completely different than what we're used to. And interesting for me is that is even still different from the way that D&D portrays the jinn, which is as one of a race of 4 sort of elemental, well, they're still basically genies, right? How interesting that it actually is something much older and much more separate. What are so knowing that is in fact what the jinn is in Islamic and in Arab culture, what are some ways that you could think of to use that jinn in a D&D like adventure hook or story or campaign idea?
Honestly, I'm just waiting for the genie pact to come out. I'm really excited about that.
Yeah.
I love that.
I mentioned this a lot in my Twitter because our relationship with jinn is not what you would expect. They are powerful beings. If you have magic, this is the natural way that you would gain it. This is not something a human would do. It's if you have to make a pact with a jinn for whatever cost it would be. And then you have the poetry, the eloquence, that if somebody who has high charisma would end up luring a genie, and she would fall in love with him and come by his village and meet his wife, telling him, okay, this is my your kids as well now.
Yeah,
that's cool.
That's genie people.
I love that. Well, that's exactly what I was going to say.
These are actual stories we hear and get told about.
I think that's fascinating. And you mentioned already the idea of a jinn pact for presumably for a warlock. But what you're describing there is maybe a new race or a sub race similar to the Genasi as they exist in D&D, but different, still more magically focused rather than elemental. It could also be a source of a sorcerer's magic. Maybe they have jinn ancestry. So it sounds like a lot of really cool opportunities for a player to use a connection to a jinn in their backstory. Awesome. Do either of the two of you? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. And for me, I love the take that D&D took with the genies. It's not a Semitic religion kind of perspective like the devils and the demons. It took out something that we consider as a superpower and made it something superpower. The elemental side, I have just loved it. It was, for my perspective, it just was so perfect.
Cool. That's good to hear. Do Daniel, Mario, do you all has that sparked ideas for you all in any way?
I've got a very convoluted one. Do you have one? You can go before me.
Well, yeah, I have one. It's basically, so there's 2 parts to my answer. There's like a general answer and a specific answer. So the general answer would be to look into legends of basically how the landmarks were formed. That is always super interesting to me, and that is something that is very prevalent in both Mesoamerica and South America. Yeah.
Before I don't want to cut you off, but I want it before we get to your to the Mesoamerican like myths and ideas. I actually want to spend just a couple of minutes to talk about if you or Daniel have ideas about the jinn and ways that we should use.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know that's what you meant.
That's okay. I'm glad that I was super clear, obviously. No, yeah, I would love for us to spend just, we've got maybe another 5 minutes or so. If either of you have jinn ideas based on what Ahmed has given us, and so that, so that the folks that are watching can sort of get ideas and watch us who, I would like to think we all at least have a passing familiarity with how to approach other cultures in a respectful, safe way, right? So, yeah.
I can say how I run jinn in my games.
Sure.
That is basically, so the games that I run are mostly centered around the cosmovision of the Maya. That is basically, because I base my games in many Mesoamerican cultures that I think are cool, and then basically make them into peoples in my world. I had to basically pick one that made the most sense to say, like, this is the truth about the cosmos, right? And the one that I latched onto was the Maya. So the Maya have something that is actually in common with a part of the Chinese worldview, which is the cardinal directions. That is basically, they assign a lot of properties to each direction. So in my world, we usually, instead of having genes of fire, of earth, of etc., I
Mhm.
usually do the gene of the west, the gene of the north, the gene of the state, and all of that. So
Cool.
yeah, they usually have different how do I say um properties basically
Uh-huh.
aligned with each direction. So instead of just being like, oh, north is air because north represents air, but it also represents movement and grace and
Yeah.
wisdom and stuff like that. So yeah, I usually take that idea of each direction representing a concept and then like run with it. I also did the same to dragons and stuff like that. So
Okay.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that there was a cardinal direction association. In
yeah,
Chinese culture, it's all with different animals.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, here is more like with colors and concepts, but it's very similar.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I think if I were to kind of go off of this gin idea, I think the one thing that I think would be really cool and something that I try to do a lot in my own like home games is the idea of different cultures interpreting the real phenomenon of other cultures. So, China and Southwest Asia like interacted a lot historically. And if these jinn are real in our worlds, well, what would a character from East Asia view? How would they view a phenomenon, a creature, an entity from, say, Southwest Asia? And I like the idea of two characters meeting, perhaps an NPC, and talking about the same thing, but maybe describing them differently, or having these cultural nuances that create a different creature in the minds of the players. And I think that's the one thing that I think D&D does poorly, is that everybody looks at the dragon the same, or everybody interprets the different gods the same. So that's what I would do.
Yeah, I love that idea, and it's your adventure, your quest is basically a misunderstanding between cultures of this same thing that they want or they need or they want to talk to or that they're interacting with, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
What a cool idea. Yeah. All right, Ahmed, any last thoughts on your gin example? I think that was great. I think we got some cool ideas, and I'm sure seen a couple of things in chat fly by as well.
I don't have anything else, but I want to piggyback on the dragon thing.
Yeah, please.
In our culture, we have a word for dragon, but we don't have anything that is unique to Arab culture about dragons. Like the closest thing I could find is maybe like a lizard, a word for a lizard, that we use the same word for a dragon. But in our myths, every time I try to track something, it turns out something coming from Christianity, Saint George especially, or coming from Chinese. And there is nothing in our culture that is specific, like very detailed or big stories about dragons.
Interesting. Interesting. So maybe then the gin is the answer.
Yeah.
I love it.
Probably killed them all.
What I do with
there you
that
go.
is basically just I took the giant feather serpents of Mesoamerica and said those are dragons, because same. Yeah, we don't have dragons, but we have these giant winged feather serpents. So yeah.
We are not having an ontological discussion about what constitutes dragon, chat. We're not doing it. Mario, why don't you go ahead? Now we can get to you talking about the landmarks and whatever else you got for us.
So I've always been fascinated by the legend surrounding, like, hey, how was this mountain made? That is something that is very interesting to me.
And
do you have
Aztec culture at least has such good stories about that.
Yeah, the one from the volcanoes from from Mexico, which is the sleeping woman. It's basically it's one of them that is very, very good, which is basically this woman who just fell asleep for so long and just basically became a mountain, like the earth started to pile up on her and became a mountain. And then her lover, which is the Popocatépetl, the volcano in front of her, is just waited for her and stood guard, and then became the other mountain. So stuff like that is the one that it would be like the general thing that I would say to look into, because I think is very inspiring and is very cool. The Tarascan people from what is today Michoacan.
That's my people.
Yeah, the Purepecha. They have so many good legends also as well, because they were known as the people of the lakes, and every lake has a story, which is, oh, this lake was made from an arrow that pierced the heart of someone, and just like water poured out and filled it, so that the name of the lake is basically unending sorrow or something like that. I'm just like pulling out ideas from my head, but stuff like that is very, very good, and I think it would make any D&D world richer and just generally better. As for specific, I right now in the story arc that I'm running in Trece Alvas is more. It's also one of those, but it's basically based in Mapuche culture, which is the indigenous people from Chile and Argentina. That they have one of their creation myths for how the La Cordillera de los Andes, the Andean mountain, was created. That is basically speaks about two giant serpents, one of the earth and one of the water. They used to be two powerful people that basically fought all the time. So their parents got mad at them and basically turned them into serpents, and just so they could stay separated. One was limited to the earth and the other one was sent to the water. Eventually, the one in the water got very resentful and started to plot of a way to get back both at his rival and brother and at humanity, because he was just very angry that he was just left alone in the water. So basically what he did is that he started a flood, and the serpent that stayed in the water rose everyone to save them from the flood. And that is what became of the giant mountain range. So stuff like that it's just very inspiring to me, and is ripe to take for D&D stories and stuff like that. We are running right now on Tres Alvas. We are running a game that involves those two gods specifically. Well, I mean, versions of those gods within the world. I find it just very, I don't know. I don't know if romantic is the right word, but like very, just inspiring and lovable, and just makes something, instead of like, oh, there's a mountain, and here's a story about that mountain,
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like a lot of times we think, we know that throughout human history, myths and legends and religion and stories have been used to explain things that we couldn't explain at that moment in time as humans, right? And a lot of times we think of that as either natural phenomenons like storms and eclipses, or as things about the heavens and celestial bodies and stuff like that. But yeah, one thing that well, you and I know Latin American myths do very well is to explain the things that we see in front of us here on Earth, the mountains and the rivers. And even just taking the idea that there is a myth behind every geographical feature is a great idea, and it is ripe for story hooks and adventure ideas. I love that. Daniel and Ahmed, ideas percolating from what Mario has shared with us about Iztaccíhuatl and Popocatépetl and the rivers and everything else?
I like one just came up immediately after you described, like, everything around you has a story. Imagine if it would be so in my head, I would have to do so much research if I were to actually try to do this as an adventure. But imagine if, this fantasy world that you've created, this fantasy Mesoamerica that you've created, is full of dormant supernatural entities. And all of a sudden there's some sort of event that wakes them up. And the landscape is literally awakening and transforming all around the mortals.
Yep.
And all of the characters have to deal with this shift in not only belief, if they think that maybe an old religion has come back, they have to deal with a shift in the landscape. Literally, forests are coming to life, mountains are coming to life, the crops are coming to life, the rivers are changing. And the characters kind of have to deal with this. And they have to deal with this in a matter of surviving. They might not even have agency over what is happening. Maybe they're just trying to survive this.
Yeah.
That would be an entire campaign setting. That'd be so dope.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's.
And I can't even do that. So take it. Free idea.
it's different, right? Than for example, if we think about even sort of Druidic myths or Indigenous American myths about the spirits of the land, this is even something different from that. These are actual creatures that have well, for example, in some of the examples that Mario gave us, there were a pair of lovers who well, such a long story, but anyway, this pair of lovers are physically these two volcanoes, right?
Yeah.
And so, as Daniel said, what if they awaken? What if the volcano? I mean, all kinds of issues, because of course it's going to erupt, but also there is an actual creature that is standing up from where this mountain has existed, and go like, wow.
I like the idea of these two lovers, these volcanoes, waking up and then holding hands and then walking across the earth. And then lava spilling out everywhere. Yeah. And all of these entities are unaffected by it. They're unaffected by it.
Yes.
Right? Because this is their world, but humanity is crumbling all around them.
That's exactly right. We're taking it back to, when these creatures, when these beings walked the earth and didn't have to worry about anything else. And how do we deal with that? Yeah. And I think it bears mentioning, since we are talking about, how do we credit these cultures? How do we be respectful of these cultures? Taking that idea, right? And not necessarily tying it to any specific Mesoamerican myths. You don't have to do the story of Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl. Just use the idea of a culture that has stories about geographic landforms. Even that is something that can throw such a curveball to your players, because it isn't necessarily the first thing that a traditional Western American or Western European gamer thinks of as the standard default setting, right? I love that. I think that's great.
Well, imagine if it was a hex crawl and you had your beautiful map, and then each hex is a different entity that is being reawakened.
Yes. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, and the map is subject to change because everything is just like
exactly. And this is in this whole game, the players and the GM can work together to draw this. You'd have like a base map, but then you draw and tell stories about how the landscape is shifting.
Yep.
Yeah.
Take it.
We got like 9. I love it. We got like 90 seconds before I want to move on to Daniel's myth. So Ahmed, do you have anything that you want to toss into the pot to do with the Mesoamerican stuff here?
Most of our stories for mountains and geography, it's especially for mountains, it's more of a religious symbolism. Like we have in our a mountain near Medina. It's called Uhud, and the Prophet was describing it. This is a mountain that loves us, and we love it. And it's the divine message would have arrived through in the mountains, not in the plains and other places. So for us, especially Muslims, like the symbolism of the high mountain is a very sacred place.
Yeah, I love that too. Yeah, and let's combine it all. What if these landforms have been dormant for all this time, but still were providing a power, a magic, a something to the world because of their spiritual connection, and now they're getting up and walking around. What does that do to the people who relied on not just their landform, but the power that they provided to the world?
Yeah.
I love it.
If you make it a religious either pilgrimage or something like that, I mean, maybe a character still has to go do their pilgrimage at the mountain, but the mountain is somewhere walking around.
Yeah.
Maybe you have communities that are literally following around these features.
Yeah. Oh my
God, yeah.
Did we just design a game?
Yeah,
I think we did. Great. I'll be in touch. Everyone in chat has to sign an NDA. All right. All right. Let's go on to Daniel. And what do you have for us?
I've actually got a couple because I've just been so inspired by the rest of you.
I love it.
One is just super easy. I really we've talked about myth and we've talked about the supernatural and the divine, but I also really like to talk about the historical. There is a bit, just based on my background in archaeology, there is a really cool piece of Chinese culture that I have never seen come into D&D. I've never seen anybody include, and it's called the Sword of Goujian. So the sword of Goujian, for anybody who's looking online. And the Sword of Goujian is actually from the spring and autumn period in China's history. And the sword is it's just under 3,000 years old. And when they discovered it, they discovered this bronze sword in a black lacquered sheath that was airtight. And when they actually unsheathed the sword, and it was amongst like 2,000 artifacts that they found. It was still sharp, and it had never tarnished. And actually, one of the archaeologists who discovered actually cut himself on the sword. And I like the idea of an ever sharp sword because there is a real ever sharp sword in China, in Hubei province. I love that. But on the more like mythological side and creatures, the one that I've become obsessed with is called the Ba snake. And the Ba snake is a massive snake that, if you're really into paleontology and you're really into like Mesoamerican paleontology, you might know about Titanoboa, this massive snake that can kill a T-Rex. Now in China, they have this myth of a snake, a python, that was so big that every 3 years it would consume an elephant. It would eat an elephant, digest it, and then excrete the bones through its scales. And it was once said that the god of archery, Hou-Yi, actually killed one with his magic bow. And he buried its body underneath a big hill or mountain. And the people built a temple dedicated to it. And they worshipped its spirit at the top of this temple. And on an adjacent hill from the temple, you could actually see another hill that was covered with elephant bones, signifying how long that snake had been there. Now, from a D&D perspective, what would be really cool is if another Ba snake appeared, but the gods, maybe Hou-Yi wasn't there, and Hou-Yi's bow was taken and stolen by another creature. And this creature would actually is another archer creature in Chinese folklore, and it's called the White Gibbon. And they're actually a series of monsters called Bai Yuan, and they're literally white monkeys with long arms, and they were known to be so good at archery that they could rival the god of archery himself. And so this giant snake has appeared and it's ravaging the landscape, and this bow is needed, and a monkey has stolen it. A monkey extremely proficient in archery has stolen it. And what do? Do you go and do you plead with the monkey, or do you try to take this bow from the monkey? I think it'd be a really cool story.
Yeah, absolutely. So many cool individual stories, right? That we can yank the characters from, or the items from. I mean, we hadn't actually talked about. We've talked about creatures and landforms, but magic items is another. Myths and legends are great resources for fun and exciting magic items.
That's the first.
So all kinds of stuff to mind there. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, the first thing that came to mind when you said that the snake would excrete the bones through the scales, I was like, I need those bones. I want to make like weapons out of them. Like
exactly. And what's interesting is that this snake, its flesh was supposed to be medicine. Its skin could be fashioned to produce magical items, and the elephant bones could also be medicine. Specifically, the bones that had passed through this giant snake.
Yeah. Ooh. Yeah, that's a whole thing that I have all kinds of desires to do, and I know they exist out there, these systems of like harvesting monster bits for cool stuff, but to have something legendary, right, to create or to use as magic items, what a cool idea. Ahmed, I'm so sorry I cut you off. Go ahead.
It made me think like in the opposite direction. Like, okay, some people are complaining by this giant snake is ravaging the land, and then you get hired as a group of adventurers to go take care of it. But this is actually a holy creature to the people native in this land. It's part of the ecosystem. Without it, worse thing is going to happen. So this is like a double-edged sword. Are you going to go and save this new upcoming urban city that happens to be in the path of this creature? Or are you going to save this creature that maintains the ecosystem of this area?
Yeah, that's a whole other thing, right? Is how do we interact with these sort of legendary creatures that we toss in? That's actually a big theme of my podcast campaign right now. Is what effects do the players interacting with these legendary beings have on the rest of the ecosystem in the world? Cool. So many ideas. Other stuff from any of the myths that Daniel shared with us just now. Other ideas for plot hooks or characters, creatures, magic items.
Well, I was just thinking what you said about the sword immediately became like I wasn't aware of it. I didn't know about the sword, the ever sharp sword. But the moment you were describing, like it was sealed tight, and then they opened it, and then the researcher cut themselves. I was like That is the beginning of a horror game.
Yes, and I was waiting.
That's like, and then he made a mistake.
Yeah,
Run the credits.
It's not this year. 2020 can't take it, y'all.
Yeah, that's that's like unsealing the tomb. That's the equivalent of unsealing the tomb.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, how does interacting with these myths and legends, what are those? What are the real frightening horror theme dangers of doing that kind of stuff? What don't we know? What is, you know, what parts of these myths that everyone grows up knowing are wrong, right? What parts of them are way darker or maybe brighter? I don't know. I guess that's a thing you can do too. But what's different, right? What do the players discover about these long-held myths is also such a cool idea for a quest or even a whole campaign arc, to learn the truth behind these myths and legends. Mm-hmm. Very cool. All right. Anything else on Daniel's examples? All right. I know that Jason is running a few minutes behind, so we are going to get to the Realmsmith demo as soon as we can, but we have a few extra minutes here. So I want to say a couple of things. First of all, you all in the chat and watching here are absolutely incredible. I believe we just hit $1,600 for the Trevor Project. That's mind-blowing. It's been 3.5 hours. We have raised $1,600.
Nice.
And that's just through our Tiltify. That doesn't include, you know, the folks who have bought Venture Maidens merch. If you're not aware, if you haven't seen the message, all of the proceeds from everything on the Venture Maidens store, since they're being so generous as to host us this weekend, all of the proceeds from all of those sales until July 1st are also going to go to the Trevor Project. So we have raised more than $1,600, but through the Tiltify, $1,600 is really amazing. So we're going to go around, and I'm going to have everyone once again introduce themselves to you all, let you know where you can find them online, how you can find their work, how you can support their work. Thank you all so much for being here and for supporting the Trevor Project. But, you know, best way to diversify gaming is to uplift and support those of us who have those different perspectives and our voices. So we're going to talk about that and where you can find them. However, I'm going to put a challenge out to those of you in chat. If someone, and I know this is a big ask, and it's okay if we don't do it, it's okay, but let's have a little fun. If someone we just got 1620, so this is going to make it a little easier on you. If someone donates the difference between right now and 2000, so what is that? $380. I will send you 2 pieces of merch from my Last Refuge merch store, which is opening up next month. I will get your address, and I will send you, in addition to anything else that you get, I will send you a couple of pieces of Last Refuge merch if you can, in one go, get us to $2,000. That is your challenge while we introduce and do our little outro stuff for you. So let's do that. And let's go in, oh, hell. I was going to say reverse order, but that requires me to remember what order we went in to start. I think that means we start with Ahmed.
Yes, I think that's the case.
Okay, great.
I'm last. I'm last.
Okay, great.
I'm Ahmed. I introduce D&D to Arabs and introduce Arabic culture to D&D players and writers. I am always on Twitter. You can find me at 20 Arabia RPG, answering whatever question you have in mind about Arabic culture.
I love it. And we'll also, all of these amazing people have their info and hopefully their links in the chat as well. So check that out. All right, so let's move over to Mario.
Yes, I'm in the same spot because I'm in the middle.
So, makes it easy on you.
Yeah. So my name is Mario Ortegon. Again, thank you for having me. You can find me on the internet as Awarius. I have a Twitch channel where I used to play a lot of video games, but I basically had to wind down on the playing because of COVID related stuff. But we still play D&D. We play 2 campaigns weekly. One of them is today, which is the Tres Albas campaign. You can find that on the Twitch D&D channel. And it's a campaign we play in Spanish. All of our, I should have probably opened with that. Everything I do is in Spanish. So yeah.
I was like, I'm going to catch this.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I should have probably mentioned that. Yeah, so but I'm very interested in like Ahmed said, basically bringing D&D to a portion of the world that is that has a harder time getting it. And in my case, we are bringing it to Spanish-speaking Latin America. I see by your face that someone did the thing.
Dan Dillon has given us
Dan.
our meet
Oh my
to
God.
2000. So I will be sending Mr. Dillon some Last Refuge merch, which frankly I owe him anyway because he
Wow.
guested with us years ago. Anyway,
Yep.
thank you, Dan. I'm so
Hero.
sorry to interrupt you, but thank you, Dan. That is so
No.
incredibly generous. And it is unbelievable to me that we've already, not even halfway through our first day, hit $2,000. Thank you
Dan
all.
is the best.
Cara Bear did the same amount, and you know what? I'm not going to penalize you for being a little late on the draw, Cara Bear. So I will also send you some merch. I'm going to reach out to you all probably via Twitch whisper. So keep an eye out for that once this panel's over to get your information. Thank you both so much. So sorry,
Yep.
Mario. Please
No,
continue.
it was a happy interruption and very much warranted. So, yeah, find me at Aquarius. There are some things that I do in English. Mainly, I'm working to bring the setting of the Tres Selvas game to print eventually. The plans were pushed back because of everything that's going on right now, but you can find updates and stuff if you follow me on Twitter. And my friend who developed the game previously, Smoking Mirror Games, is the one who's helping me bring all of this to print. So yeah, you can find that. I think there's a website, but I don't know the website. So just follow me on Twitter. You can find all the info there.
Perfect.
Nice.
Perfect. I love it. Yeah, that's always my answer. Yeah, I don't know. Look at my Twitter. I don't know. All right, Daniel.
Hey, I'm Daniel. I co-host, produce the Asians Represent podcast. We, since COVID, have been streaming. We do a D&D actual play set in a fantasy China. We actually started a new series with Ahmed, and once a month, we actually are reading through Al-Qadim, Arabian Adventures. We have an amazing cast of experts for that one. I'm just the producer. On the side, I have a program that I run in Toronto called Level Up Gaming. We help adults with autism and other disabilities learn social skills and develop them through tabletop games like D&D. I also write about monsters. So if you liked that, the giant snake, the bass snake, if you like the white gibbon, if you want to know more about that stuff, I have a Patreon, patreon.com/Daniel H. Kwan, where I write about Chinese monsters. I just published a small zine called Denizens of Mountains and Seas. It's a collection of 8 monsters from classical Chinese literature that are OSR and D&D 5e compatible.
Fantastic. That's you. Yeah. Fantastic. And once again, I've been your moderator, Eugenio, also known as DM Jazzy Hands. I'm on the Twitters at DM Jazzy Hands. I'm the dungeon master and producer of an actual play D&D podcast called The Last Refuge. You can find us at DND Last Refuge. I also occasionally stream video games and all of that on my Twitch channel. And very soon, hey Celeste, you're in chat. Has that thing been announced? Can I talk about that? I'm doing a very fun thing that I don't know if I'm allowed to tell you about. Nope, it has not. All right, well, keep an eye on my Twitter because there's a really super fun thing that I get to do very soon on the internets, and keep an eye on that. But yeah, that's me. I will be back later this evening to run some incredible adventures through an adventure in Icewind Dale called Cold Comfort. But before then, we have so many other fantastic things going on today. And you all are absolutely incredible. Even since those 2 phenomenally generous donations, we've had even more come in. We're already almost at $2,500. You all are fantastic. This is such an amazing celebration of this community, remembering that we can all come together and do good and tell good stories and have a ton of fun playing games. Ahmed, Daniel, Mario, thank you 3 so much for joining me today, for telling these stories, for helping people to understand how they can look beyond the cultures and the myths and the stories that we're all, particularly in the United States anyway, that we're all taught from an early age, and that there's so much more out there that we can carefully and respectfully and safely use to tell even more interesting stories. Thank you all so much. Chat, thank you all so much. Please hang around. As soon as Jason is ready, we're going to have him in the Realmsmith to do some mini painting for us, which will be a great time, and then plenty more where that comes from. Thank you all so much. I'll be in the chat the rest of the day. Stay safe, stay healthy, and happy gaming, y'all.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.